profession. He's a member of the Likud, and he's a lieutenant colonel in the reserves. But today, he's addressing us as the mayor of Efrat, and will tell us a little bit about the history of Efrat and how, along with the rest of the Gush, it has risen. Thank you.
The moving slide and sound show with the background and the history of this region. And the last scene of the bunker and the wall with all the names, the memory wall, I think I can imagine the emotions that it raises amongst you, and to try now and to ignore what you've seen up until now is quite difficult. So what I think we'll do is I'll take you in a very quick time tunnel from the last picture that you saw at the show now up until to the current situation. And if I understand correctly, we have about 40 minutes until lunch, right? 1 o'clock is lunch, and we don't want you to starve to death. So I will try and finish on time. But what I think I'll do is I will give you in a nutshell the run through the time tunnel. I'll bring us up to the current time and era, and then I'll open the floor for questions, because I can talk for quite a long time about things which are of great interest for myself, but not necessarily of any relevance to your important distinguished guests. So is that a deal? Yeah. Do we need to have a vote, or it's all you? Okay. It's not the Knesset. Do you think in the Knesset they vote? Eventually. Okay. So, basically 1948, the War of Independence, Gush Etzion falls on Dalet Be'iyar, a day before the Declaration of Independence, and Ben Gurion on Friday, the 5th of Iyar, basically says that if it wasn't for Gush Etzion, the state of Israel wouldn't have been established. One of the people involved in Gush Etzion prior to 1948 is Moshe Moshkovitz. During the days that you saw the last scene taking place, he's actually somewhere quite far away from here. He is in Europe trying to help survivors come across to Israel, and that's why he's not here where his home is, but he is in Europe and he hears about what's happening, and he carries on with his special mission to try and bring people over to Israel. Just as a small opening brackets to loosen up a bit the atmosphere, the chief rabbi of Israel at that time, Yitzhak Herzog, is being brought over to set the stone for Masuot Yitzhak. And they distinguish the place in his name, even though he is still alive. Why? In order to show their credit for all his efforts to bring over Jews to Israel. And Rabbi Herzog, the chief rabbi, says to Moshko, you know, you're quite lucky that my name is Yitzchak. Why? Because he says, can you just imagine that my name would have been Feifel, and then what you've set up here, Masuot Feifel? So they set up Masuot Yitzchak in his name, and that's going back to the days before the War of Independence. After Moshko comes back from Cyprus, the main task that he is given is to look after the women and orphans that were evacuated to Jerusalem, like you saw on the movie, and that's his mission. He needs to try and help these women and these young children, and he's starting to adopt all of them and try to renew or carry on with life with the tragedy that these people have suffered. He himself goes to the new Masuot Yitzchak, for those of you who are familiar with, by Kiryat Malachi. That's where he sets his home. And after the Six-Day War in 1967, taking into account that he's become the father of all these orphans, he has this dream. Let's revive the presence of Jewish people here in Gush Etzion to what was before the War of Independence. But the lesson has been learned. And the title was, if I recall correctly, I was asked to talk about the vision, the dream, and where has it come to. So you saw in the show, in the film, that there weren't really that many people living here prior to 1948. They were very Zionistic, they were very ideological, but there wasn't any source of income, there wasn't any industry, there wasn't any business here, there were no educational systems. And when Moshko comes with the dream to renew the Jewish presence in Gush Etzion after the Six-Day War, he raises a target. He wants to have here 100,000 Jews. He understands that it has to be something substantial that won't be revoked, won't be erased just by a few violent Arabs. And the target is set for 100,000 Jews. But that's not the only target that's being set. The other target that's being set is making something big enough, substantial enough, that will contain itself, that will be self-sufficient. And when he goes to speak to Moshe Dayan and discuss with him this plan that he has, some of the plan is to come back to the old places where Jews lived beforehand. But there's also a plan to build a city, not small kibbutzim, not small farms, a city, something substantial. And they start discussing the location of the city, and Moshko, who is a great dreamer and also a person that knows how to take his dreams into fruition, suggests that the city will be built between the old Gush Etzion, where Alon Shvut is, where we are now at the moment, and the city of Bet Shemesh, a place called Gvaot. For those of you who are from Bet Shemesh, so you know when you come up, there's a sharp right turn, that place. Moshe Dayan tells him, no. If we want to learn our lesson from before the War of Independence, we're going to go the other direction. We're not going to build the city closer to the Green Line. We want to take it further away, and that's why Efrat is chosen as a location. And I'm extremely happy that the second half of the day you'll actually be visiting Efrat, so you will see what I mean. If there's Route 60, which takes you from Jerusalem to Beersheba, Efrat is on the other side of the road. And he starts discussing with Moshe Dayan the building of the city. And in 1975, the government actually voted and approved the establishment of the city of Efrat. But, like many votes up until today, the fact that there has been a vote, the fact that there has been a decision, doesn't mean that anybody is taking responsibility. And Moshko basically understood that the mission of building the city is up to him. Nobody else is going to do it besides him. And Moshko tells a story that he once met with Dizengoff, or it's written in one of the memos of Mayor Dizengoff, who was the first mayor of Tel Aviv, and the story goes like this. They asked Mayor Dizengoff, how do you build a city in Israel? Or more precisely, how do you become a mayor of a city in Israel? And the answer is, you build your own city. So Moshko took that old piece of history and adapted it to Efrat, and started building a city. A city with a vision that in this region there will be 100,000 Jews. Moshko last year celebrated his 90th birthday. For any of you who are familiar with Moshko, he is still alive, kicking, biting, pushing, makes us all feel extremely old when we stand next to him. He doesn't stop dreaming, he doesn't stop planning, and he doesn't stop doing. And with one of the meetings that I had with Moshko, and today, just that you know, in Efrat we have 10,000 people, which break down into 2,000 families. Some of the organizers of this group have very strong ambassadors in Efrat, which I'm sure she'll tell you about them if you haven't noticed. Part of their assistance in the food and beverages department this morning. But we have 10,000 residents break down into 2,000 households, and we're in the process of building 1,000 more units, which means that within 3 years' time, in Efrat itself, we'll have 16,000 people. In Gush Etzion today, there are about 17,000 people. I'm sure some of you are better with me in math, so you can do the calculations. If we count in Beitar Elit, which is not part of Efrat, it's not part of Gush Etzion Regional Council, but it's definitely part of this geographical area, we have approximately 50,000 people living there. So how much does that make us up to? 90,000 people, 90,000 Jews living in this region. So Moshko is close to fulfilling his dream. We have to say in the credit of Beitar Elit, their birth rate is a class and a half every week. When you speak to the mayor of Beitar, how many people live in your city? So he looks at the clock, and as the seconds pass, he adds one more and one more. Thank God they have a lot of babies and a lot of kids. Bli Ayin Hara, definitely, and that's also maybe relevant a bit to what emunah do, and we'll get to that in a minute. But with one of my meetings with Moshko, I asked him, and this comes back to the vision, I asked him, Moshko, how did you build a city with no financial plan? Because I'm sure you all come from different places and you hear about the financial difficulties of the local authorities, whether it's Bet Shemesh, whether it's Yerushalayim, whether it's Efrat. And I asked him, how did you build a city with no financial plan? Because in Efrat, the residents are extremely happy, but we have no industry, we have no commercial areas, we have no businesses, we have no office spaces. And if you read a bit about the papers, about what mayors like to have in their cities, all the mayors like to have businesses, industry, office space. Why? Because you collect from them a lot of arnona, and the expense of them is very low. On the other hand, when you have residential areas, you don't collect that much, and the expense on each family is very dear. So it's more profitable to have other things than residents in a city. So I asked him, how come you planned a city? You're so careful in planning. You've got everything planned into details. Why didn't you give me some oxygen, some industrial areas, some businesses that it will be easier to live today? And he looked at me and he said to me, you've misread the map. I said, what do you mean? Where have I gone wrong? Bring me a campus. So I said, no, you don't understand me. My vision was building in Gush Etzion an industry of education. My vision was that this will be a pillar of fire in an educational aspect. One of the first things he did in Gush Etzion was build Har Etzion, the yeshiva in Alon Shvut. I'm sure you're all familiar with that institute, whether it was your kids who studied in it, whether it was relatives who came from abroad to study in it, and it just so happens that today is the yortzeit of Rav Amitar, who was one of the Roshei Yeshivot. So he has definitely succeeded with that. But not only that. Efrat and Gush Etzion are well known for their extremely good educational institutions who have become a magnet for people to actually decide that they want to live in this region because of the educational system, and also because people send their kids to study here. And this comes across with the other partner that Moshko had, and that's Rav Riskin. And when Rav Riskin comes from Lincoln Square, and he comes to set up Efrat with Moshko, and this is a story told by the first mayor of Efrat, Ino Nachiman. You see on one of the most exclusive, expensive pieces of land in Efrat, a yeshiva called Neve Shmuel, the high school. And you ask Ino Nachiman, how come you gave that piece of land to set up a school? This is the place where we could have sent the land for the dearest price. That would have been a great source of income. So he again tells me, you've misread the map. And I tell him, what do you mean I've misread the map? What, you want to tell me this is not the most exclusive place in Efrat? You want to tell me that there is no yeshiva there? And he tells me, no. You have to understand. When we set up Efrat, we were all young people. Our concerns were, where will be the kindergarten, going back to emunah, and maybe elementary school. None of us thought about a high school. And we have this American crazy rabbi who comes from the United States and says to us who are fighting whether we'll open one kindergarten or two kindergartens, and he says to us, listen, I need a plot to build a high school. And we all looked at him like he's from Lincoln Square. And we said to him, you know what? Go ahead. And we gave him that plot to build a high school. Little did we know how successful he was going to be. And Rav Riskin today is the head of Or Torah Stone, which have high schools all over the Gush. They have 2 in Efrat, 2 in Gush Etzion, but they've also got in Jerusalem. And today Or Torah are sending messengers all over the world to spread the vision of the education that they've developed in Gush Etzion. So in that respect, both these founders, these pillars, have managed to live their dream and to see how in Gush Etzion we almost have already today 100,000 people, and it's definitely become an industry of education. Before I open the floor for questions, one more point about Efrat. When you will come into Efrat today, you will go in through the sovereign entrance. You will drive over quite a lot of sleeping policemen, so I suggest you all sit at the front of the bus, because those who will sit at the back of the bus will suffer. So my apologies in advance. But you will notice, going into the 3 different daycares that we have of emunah in Efrat, that Efrat is extremely long and narrow. For those of you who have visited it already, I'm sure you're familiar with it. For those of you who haven't, and it will be your first time, you will experience it. From one end to another, it's 8 kilometers. 5 miles for those who haven't yet adjusted to the Israeli counting method. The width of it, at the most narrowest place, is a dual carriageway. And when I became mayor, and I don't know how many of you ever looked at the overview picture of where you live or where you come from. Sometimes we live it, we don't actually view it. But when I was elected and this photo was brought to my attention, it was a bit shocking. And I asked, who was the wise guy who planned the city in such an awkward way? Just think about it. Okay, I mean, as Israelis, the best example that we have is Na'alal. Right? We're all familiar with the overview picture of Na'alal. All the center elements are in the center. there's one ring of houses surrounding the center elements, and there's an outer ring of barns and farmyards and things that basically the people go out and work. That's the best view that you can have of a city, with absolutely planned from stage one. How do you plan a city of 8 kilometers length? Where's the shopping center? Where do you locate schools? How do you provide public transportation? How do you collect sewage? Why? Why make life difficult? If you're building a town from scratch, why not build it like Naalal? Why not make life simple? You know how many shuls we have in Efrat because it's so long and people want to walk to shul? Over 30 shuls. You know how many rabbis that is? How many gabbaim that is? How many breakaway minions that is? If you want to go to a bar mitzvah, how many places you have to go and visit on one Shabbat? Why? And to make the question even harder, not only it's long, but those founders, which we've mentioned their name already, also didn't want the city to be surrounded by a fence. And when you realize in what type of neighborhood we live in, when you vision the pictures of the history that you've just seen and you know who lives around us, how do you provide security to such a long stretch? Now, I'm sure that you've all seen those movies. Sometimes I speak to groups that don't know what I'm talking about, but I'm taking a wild guess that you know exactly what I'm talking about. You remember those old Western movies that there was a long trail of cowboys in cabins, and all of a sudden the Indians come from the hilltops and start shooting and screaming, and what do the cowboys do? Not like this, they do like this. Circle the wagons, right? The first one to identify those vicious Indians shouts out, circle the wagons. And for those who are suffering from hearing problems, they just do also this motion that everybody will understand that you're better off circling the wagons as quickly as possible. Why? To have some sort of central element that you can protect. I can stand in the middle of town and you decide where it is today after your visit, because I still don't know where it is. Shout as loud as I want, circle the houses. No houses will start moving and becoming some sort of central element that we can actually protect. And we said that those founders have learned their lesson from those pictures that you've just viewed. So why did they not think of that issue as well? How am I supposed to provide security to the residents of Efrat with such a big challenge? And the answer comes within the question. They've learned their lesson. The lesson was, and again I was told I haven't told the campus in the right direction, I haven't read the map correctly. The answer was, if we build a city in such a way that we only build it on land which is owned by private Jewish individuals, or we only build it on what's called state-declared land, there will be no need for a fence. And sure enough, 32 years later, Efrat is still not surrounded by a fence. You will come and you will see that there's no heavy presence of security, whether it's police or army. The distance, the proximity. If you go to the newest Ma'on Emunah that we have completed just a year ago, you will see the houses. I'll tell you a secret. When we opened the Ma'on Emunah, we invited two distinguished guests to come and open it. One was the Minister of Education, at that time it was Gidon Saar, and the other one was Benjamin Netanyahu, who is the Prime Minister. They both opened the school year at that time in Efrat, and the second stop was supposed to be to go and open the new Ma'on Emunah. The security forces didn't allow the Prime Minister to go to that daycare because it was too close to the Arab village. So we compromise on the Minister of Education. But when you will be there, you will see how close it is. You will see why the Shabak and the army were afraid to bring the Prime Minister there. But they didn't hear the story of Efrat. The story of Efrat is that we have managed to build such a relationship that 32 years later there's still no need for a fence. We've managed to build a relationship that when the security fence that goes along Route 60 when you come from Jerusalem and it's on your left, or when you go on 443, it's on both your sides. When that wall was supposed to be built in Efrat, Efrat was the first place where Jews and Arabs united together against building the fence. Because we believe that in order to have good neighborhood relationships, you don't necessarily need to have high fences. You need to have an ongoing dialogue. You need to know your neighbors, you need to know their needs, they need to know your needs, and when there's a joint interest, there is hope. So on two different occasions, the head of Wadi Nis, that's closer to Efrat than Efrat is from one end to another, phones the mayor of Efrat at that time and says to him, listen, we see some suspicious movement from the area of our village coming towards your town. People that we don't know their whereabouts, people that we suspect have some ulterior motive, and we suggest you go and check them out. And sure enough, on both incidents, we went and checked it out and found out it was terrorists who wanted to do a terrorist attack in Efrat. And only due to the awareness of our neighbors, we've managed to stop them in due course. So that's the relationship that we have up until today. That's the relationship that you'll manage to see today when you come and visit. And I think I'll stop here and let's start taking questions.